Today's webinar is presented by Todd Barnsley from Redback Conferencing. Todd is the event manager at Redback Conferencing and has over 5 years' experience in the online conferencing industry. Todd is no stranger to both the good and not so good webinar experiences. He has also worked with many of Australia's top organisations in order to create, market and implement their online webinar programs. And today he's here and aiming to inspire you with top tips and tools and techniques that will ensure your next webinar is a success. So before I pass the microphone off to Todd, I'd just like everyone to get familiar with the technology, and if you can just type in the messages box where you're based today, where you're actually dialing in from, and also what the weather's like there. I'll start it off by telling you where I'm from, and I can tell you right now that I'm in Sydney and it's rainy and quite miserable. So if you can do all the same thing just to get you familiar. We've got someone from New Zealand, from Wellington. Welcome, Marilyn. Parramatta seems about the same. It is quite dreadful either. So now that you've all got the hang of that, we hope that you do use this throughout the webinar to interact with us. And without any further ado, I'll pass the microphone on to Todd.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks for that lovely introduction. And welcome to all. Thanks for joining. So I see a couple of us have been spared the lovely weather that Sydney have. I see that maybe you've got to be up in Queensland today to enjoy that nice weather. So good luck to those people up in Queensland. Thanks for joining. Okay, so I'll get things kicked straight off. We'll have a quick look at the agenda for today's presentation. So after this quick introduction and overview, we're going to go straight into looking at planning your slide deck and some of the things that you should look at before you even start creating your slide deck. A couple of the things that it's worthwhile to sort of touch base on and consider. From there, we'll look at actually creating your slide deck and some of the do's and don'ts associated with that. After we've done that, we'll look at some PowerPoint tips, I guess some ideas and some tips that you might not have thought of in terms of using PowerPoint when creating your presentations. And we'll also look at some cool online resources. And by cool, we mean free. So yeah, plenty of free resources that you can use to spruce up your presentation slides. After that, we'll go to question and answers, and hopefully you guys will have a couple of questions for me by the end of the presentation, and then we'll just have a quick wrap-up and conclusion. So the first thing we're going to look at is planning your slide deck. And as I said, before you sort of open up PowerPoint and start making your presentation for your webinar, there's a couple of things that it's worthwhile to sort of go over and consider before you do that, and that's what we'll look at now. First thing I'd suggest when creating your slides is to first have a good idea of the overall structure of your webinar. So for example, if you know that you're going to be having a 1-hour webinar, it's a good idea to know exactly how you're going to break that hour down before you start creating the slides. So in the example that we see here, you've got an introduction and overview, followed by the main content or presentation, then followed by a question and answer session, and then the summary and conclusion. So that's a pretty typical, I guess, breakdown of a 1-hour webinar structure. Of course, if you've got multiple presenters or you're breaking your content down into multiple sections, you might spread the question and answer section out in different ways, but we can use this as a typical example. Now, timing is one thing that you should be well aware of. Timing will sort of dictate exactly how many slides you're going to want to present during your presentation. So if we have a look at the example you see on the screen there, that's a typical 1-hour webinar. And we're using the same, I guess, schedule or breakdown that we did in the previous slides. And just looking at that, we've broken that down into time. So we've allowed 5 minutes for the introduction, 40 minutes for the main content or the main body of the presentation, 10 minutes for question and answers, and 5 minutes for summary and conclusion. And so altogether that makes you 60 minutes. So the thing to be aware of there is that if you're presenting a 1-hour webinar, you might not have 60 minutes with which to present and with which to sort of base your slides on. So it's a good idea just to sort of have that in your head firsthand, and that way when you do make your slides, you're going to get some better value for money out of your slides, and you're sort of also going to get better value for money out of the time that you have to present. So when it comes to planning a slide deck, what I would usually recommend, and that is to sort of get your points down on paper first, I actually like to recommend to people that they put together their audio presentation before they consider the visual slides that will accompany the audio. So whether or not you literally do that with a piece of paper and pen, or you do that with your computer, it's much for muchness. But I think the important thing would be to get a good idea of the main points that you are going to be basing your slides on. So once you have a good idea of the content you're presenting and you've broken that down into main points, then you can use those main points, and we'll have a look at where we go from there in a few slides' time. So once you've identified your main points or main sections, you can use those to create your agenda. So the agenda is helpful just to sort of give your participants a guide from the beginning on how the time's going to be spent, what sort of things are going to be covered. So you can use your main points that you've identified in that content to create your agenda. And then once you've got that agenda, you'll find that it's a lot easier to put together your slide deck based on the points and topics that you'll be covering there. So we'll move on now to creating your slide deck, and just encourage you, if you've got any questions at all, let me know. I'll keep a rough eye on that message box down the left-hand side. Again, I'll set aside about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions, but if you've got any questions along the way, don't be afraid to fire them away. Okay, so we'll have a look at creating your slide deck now. So once you've sort of got a good idea of the content that you'll be presenting, you've got your main points down, and you've got a good idea of your agenda, then you're in a lot better position to actually put together your slides. And you should find also that you can save yourself a bit of time doing that. Often if you sort of just try and make your slides from scratch, as you sort of familiarise yourself with the content, you'll find that it takes a lot longer as you and R, and you sort of go back and change a lot more things. If you start your slides from a bit better point, say once you've already made your agenda and you've got a good idea of your made points, then it can be a lot quicker. So the first thing that I'd recommend, and I've just got a question coming through from Natalie, which I'll have a look at in just a moment. Thanks, Natalie. The first thing I'd recommend when it comes to creating your slide deck is thinking about templates. Creating a template for your pages can save you a lot of time in the long run. It can save you a lot of thought as well, rather than sort of having to think out each page one by one. Once you've got a template, you'll find that the content of each page, all the words, the pictures that you use in each page is all you're thinking about, so you don't have to worry so much about layout and things like that. But with your templates, a couple of things to think about that we would recommend would be the information that you include in the template. So for example, you might like to include a header and a footer, and that header and footer you can use to include such things as the section heading or the webinar heading. You can use it for support information. And you'll see in the page that we're looking at right now, the support information that you see down the bottom, that appears in every page. So that's part of the template that I created for this particular slide deck for today's presentation. So I'd sort of recommend spending a little bit of time deciding on your template. And one thing I'd encourage as well, if you're part of an organisation or an association that runs regular webinars with multiple presenters, then it might be an idea that the template is something that is created company-wide, or indeed sort of created as a collaboration between the different presenters. And that way you can also have uniformity, not just across the pages of your slides, but also across the various webinars that your company runs. So just having a look there at the quick example of a template that I've used there, you'll see that I've got a quick header up the top, which I use for the title. It also has a little bit of red back branding, just to sort of keep that in tow with the company branding. And again, the footer that I've got down there just includes the support information. A couple of other things that you should probably bear in mind when putting your template together is things like fonts, layouts and font sizes. So and we're going to look at fonts in a little more detail in the resource section, but I would probably recommend as a good practice that you probably keep your fonts to about 2 or 3. I mean, you can get lots of really nice, cool-looking fonts for your webinar, and you can sort of get a bit excited when you're putting the slides together. But you'll find that if you sort of keep your fonts uniform, then your slides will sort of come across a lot better from start to finish. And I guess just sort of deciding on, say, for example, one font for headings, one font for the main body of your content, and things like that. And that way it just keeps it a bit more uniform throughout the presentation. So from that point, once you've got your template down, what I'd recommend is putting some consideration into your opening slides. And this is particularly important in a webinar as opposed to other forms of presentation where you might, just bear with me one moment, other forms of presentation where you might be accompanied by a slide deck. Reason being is that in a webinar, a lot of your participants may join up to 30 to 45 minutes early, even more in some cases. Generally, that's just because they want to make sure that they're logged in and they don't have any issues, any technical issues on the day. But as a result of that, you've got people sort of staring at that first slide that you've created for anywhere up to an hour, realistically. So it's really important, I guess, to be aware of the opportunities that the first slide presents to you, and I guess to make the most out of that. So we would recommend a couple of things that you should always include in the first page. That would be the title of the webinar, the names of the presenter or presenters if there's multiple, also the start time, and perhaps some other information. It could be logistic information or support information. But basically, you want to include as much information as you need to on that front page, and that can sort of avoid you having to answer a lot of last-minute questions from your participants who might sort of be new to the whole webinar experience and might not know exactly what to expect. So a good opening slide can set the scene and can sort of put your participants in the right stead and give them the right expectations for your webinar.
Todd, just on that, you've obviously managed countless events in the past. Would you recommend that organisations and associations actually have an opening slide that they use for every single webinar that they hold?
Yeah, definitely, especially if the organisation does host multiple webinars. Going back to what I said about the template, I think the same thing would go for opening slides. So if you're working for a company or an association and you are sort of having regular webinars, be it with the same presenter or with different presenters, then yeah, I would put a lot of thought into possibly putting together a opening slide template. So aside from the template that you use when creating your slides itself, just having a template that your presenters will use or your organisers will use when putting together that first slide, just so that some of that pertinent information and that information that really should be included in each webinar makes it to the first slide, regardless of who the presenter might be or the organiser might be on the day. So good question. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. Again, similarly, we'd recommend that you put a bit of thought into the last slide. Probably not as vital as the opening slide, but again, it's a good bracket, good closing bracket on your webinar. For example, you might find that you finish up a little early and you're fielding questions for a little longer. There's nothing, I guess, sort of more off-putting at the end of a webinar than just sort of being left for a good 10 to 15 minutes on a page of content, maybe the last page of the slides, especially if you're, as a presenter, asking your participants for questions. And you'll find that that slide will influence your participants. They'll look at what's on their screen and they'll ask you questions about that slide, and you might find that your participants aren't really thinking about the whole presentation as a whole, because what they're really still looking at is that last slide. So it's a good idea to sort of anticipate that and to have a last slide ready, so when you do get to the end of your questions or get to the end of your presentation, then you can have something on the screen reaffirming that you are coming to the conclusion of the event, and also just reinforcing any commitments or any promises you've made to the participants. At the end of the webinar, you can just reinforce those promises in your final page, and you'll see there just a little screenshot of a final page of this webinar, which we'll see in a little bit more detail later in the slide. But yeah, it's a good idea, and again, if you've got multiple presenters, that might be something that you think about including as part of a global template that all of your presenters would use as well. Okay, just looking at a few questions that have come in.
So there's been a few questions about the functionality of the PowerPoint within a webinar, because some webinar providers may be different. So Natalie and Isa have questioned the ability to use animations and also videos within a webinar.
Good question. With animations, certainly on the Redback platform, animations aren't rendered in the webinar, and that is the same for transitions. So transitions can be worked around because you can just, I guess, resave your transitions to separate slides. But with animations, yeah, it's a good thing to note that they won't render in a Redback webinar. And it's a good thing. A lot of providers you'll find it will be the same. So if you're with another provider, it's a good thing to check if you do have animations in your slides. But it's just a good practice. We'd recommend saving your slides without the animations before you send them through to your provider. Again, that's something, if you're not with Redback, check with your provider to make sure that that information reflects the same for you as well. In terms of video, that's a little different. On the Redback platform, we can certainly incorporate your videos into your webinar slides. It's not something that you can embed into your PowerPoint presentations like you might externally. So with videos, you just need to make sure that you get them or get the link to your event manager ahead of time, and we can certainly include those videos in the presentation. And just as an example, there'll be two videos that I include in today's presentation that we've uploaded, so that'll give you a quick demonstration of that.
And Juliet as well has asked about Prezi, whether or not we'll be able to use that in the future. And I think there's a difference between uploading presentations and screen sharing in webinars, isn't there, Gavin? Todd?
True. Sorry, that's okay. I'll let you off just once, Sarah. Yeah, so a little different. So, for example, if you were to use another application to create your presentations, you can certainly save them as images or as a JPEG in order for you to upload them to the webinar presentation. So if, for example, you weren't using PowerPoint at all, there are still some options. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, and I think in terms, Juliet, of uploading your presentations into a webinar platform, that will be something that's coming in the future. Prezi is still relatively new for a lot of people out there, and I think it took a while for PowerPoint to even have the ability to be uploaded into these sort of platforms. But there are always alternatives to showing other versions of your presentation, I suppose.
Thanks, Sarah. Great. Okay, and a couple of, I guess, best practices and tips that I'd give you when it comes to creating the slides once you've sort of got past your opening and closing slides. The point I make here would be to try and keep your slides, I guess, one point or one main idea per slide, rather than sort of jam-packing each of your slides with bullet point after bullet points. I like to say that bullets can kill, so just be careful with your audience having to bear through too many bullet points page after page. So it's a bit of a facetious example in the images you see there, but I like it. So you've got the two, what I call hobo signs. I don't know if that's the politically correct definition these days, but you look at the first sign, obviously it's got a range of different fonts, it's got a range of different messages sort of squashed here and there. Some words are underlined, some words are in subscripts, and the general impression you get of that sign is, what on earth is it saying? I mean, even to this day, I've sort of looked at it for the last 2 weeks when I'm putting this presentation together, and I'm still not sure 100% know what it is that they're asking for. When we look over on the right-hand side, there we've got it, hungry, need help, and a little God bless down the bottom. So in terms of the message, that's a lot clearer. I mean, in these two examples, it's quite likely that the message that they're trying to get across is really similar. They're asking for help, maybe a little donation. But just in terms of the audience, if you sort of picture that cardboard sign as a presentation slide in your webinar, which is easier for your audience to understand? And I guess that's the point we make here is, if you do have multiple points to be making, they are related. I wouldn't forbid bullet point lists, and sometimes there's examples when you would sort of explicitly need to use a bullet point list, but where you don't need to, I would recommend trying to space those points out across multiple slides. Even if you're sort of moving from one slide to the other quite rapidly during your presentation, you will find that that message sinks in a little better for your audience, so when they're not having to sort of locate that point in amongst a range of others. When it comes to your slide deck, we recommend that pictures are a good thing, and probably you can't really overdose on pictures, I'd recommend. What I would say is to try and keep them relevant. Obviously, a lot of the pictures that you use in your webinar will come organically, and there'll be pictures that you have at hand that you need to show during the presentation. And there'll be things like there might be images that you've culled from internal documents or things like that, or images that are coming straight out of your knowledge base. But there are other times when you're going to want to include images to reinforce a point. So it might be an image that you find from a stock image website or something that you just find on Google. But we'd recommend that that's a good thing. Even if it's just a sort of humorous little image that you use to reinforce points, like you might have seen in the previous slides. It's a good thing to, I guess, reinforce those points that you're making to your audience. So pictures are a good thing. So get adventurous and sort of jump on Google, and sort of where you do see a blank page and you think that there could be an image there that will assist you in the point that you're trying to make, then don't be afraid to sort of jump on and have a look around and see what you can find on Google. And thank you, Sarah. Sarah's just jumping in there and including a couple of stock photo sites there for your reference. Now, stock photo sites are good. You should find that you can get a lot of really good quality images that you can use in your webinar. And in terms of pricing, I think generally for image sizes that you would use in the typical webinar presentation, you're probably looking at around $1 typically for that image. And that allows you to use that, that image copyright free. So yeah, it's a good idea. If you're worried about some of the images that you're just sort of grabbing off Google and you're not sure of the source and whether or not you're allowed to use those, then yeah, we'd recommend going to a stock site and you can buy those and you've got the rights to those images moving forward. Now, another point I would make that would differ from what I'd say about pictures would be regarding video. As opposed to pictures, I think you really can overdose on video, and I would recommend that if you're planning on using video in your webinar, to make sure that you're only using video when it's logical to do so. What I mean by that, if you've got, when you're putting together your webinar, videos that your company have that it would be of assistance to show in the webinar, then of course, and that's a great example of where you would use video. If you find yourself sitting there thinking, wonder if I can go onto YouTube and find a funny little video to reinforce this point, I'd say no, don't do that. Pictures, sure, because pictures are sort of a lot more organic and can sort of be incorporated into your presentation a lot more seamlessly. Videos, you'll find, do stop the presentation momentarily, even if it's just the time that the video's buffering for your participants, or it's the time that you sort of upload and get the video on the screen. And also, depending on the length of the video, you can sort of distract your audience, and particularly if it's just something that you think you've included just to sort of keep things light and entertaining. If you wanted to do that, I'd recommend rather tell a joke or include a funny picture. Videos I would sort of more save to instances where it's sort of obvious that you've got a video that you need to share. So if you find yourself thinking, can I find a video for this, then that's probably the stage where you should not be including a video. So if you've got any questions about that, just sort of while I'm going through some of the other parts of this section here, then shoot them away, because I know a lot of people sort of when they start to think about their webinar, the first thing they think about is what videos they can include. So that advice might sort of come as a shock to some of you. So if you've got any questions, let me know. Okay. When it comes to questions, one thing that we'd recommend is that it's worthwhile including a slide in your slide deck that lets your audience know that you're going to questions, rather than just sort of leaving it on the last slide that you're on and then opening up to questions. As I sort of mentioned earlier with your last slide, if you're on a slide of content and you're asking for questions, then that page might influence the questions you're getting and might sort of, I guess, pigeonhole the questions, and you'll find that most of your questions that you're getting relate to that slide, because visually people are sort of looking at that slide, and when you've mentioned that you're going to questions, they sort of go, oh, I'm going to ask a question, I'll ask it about, and they look up at their page and that's what they reference. So it's a good idea when you're putting together your slides just to be aware of that. And if you, going back to the start when we said sort of planning your slides, if you've got a good idea of when you're going to questions, then you'll know when to include those question slides in your slide deck. And that way you can sort of just sit on that slide until the questions are over, and then when you move on to the next slides, then the audience sort of knows that the questions are finished also. Similarly, I would say if you're conducting polling in your webinar, that it's a good idea to have a slide that reinforces that poll question. Much like questions, obviously if you ask a poll question and you're still on the previous page, then people can be distracted. It's also a good way to reinforce the fact that you're waiting for a response to that poll. So obviously, once the poll pops up on their screen, then people can reference the large size slide when looking at the question and the answers they can give. So I'm going to surprise you a little here, and what better way than to demonstrate this suggestion than to pop up a quick poll myself. So I'm just going to open up a little poll for everybody to give a response to, and hope I haven't put anybody on the spot with this little quiz, but hopefully it's a pretty easy one. So you'll see a little poll box pop up. I'm going to give you a couple of moments to provide an answer to that poll.
Great. So if you can just answer either A, B, C, or D, obviously the best one that represents your answer, and then click on answer. We'll then just wait a few seconds and then share the results with everybody. And it's funny, Todd, I'm getting an overwhelming response for one particular answer.
Oh, good. Well, they haven't made it too hard. All right, excellent.
We won't point anyone out either for getting the wrong answer.
No, that's okay.
All answers are correct, aren't they?
Fantastic.
Webinar
Well done, everybody. I'm really impressed. So, of course, the answer to that question is D, all of the above. So, well done. Okay, I'll close that down. So, moving on now to the next section, which is PowerPoint tips. So, this section, we're just going to look at PowerPoint itself and some of the features that are available to you that you might not have used before, that you might have used before and not used to their full advantage. So, let's start things off with Smart Art. And I did say Smart Art, just to confirm that. But this is one of my favourite features of PowerPoint. It's really easy to use, and it can sort of really, I guess, move your presentation to being something that looks like it's just been put together really quickly and cheaply to something that looks quite nice and professional. So if you have a quick look at the example at the bottom there, you'll just see on the left-hand side a pretty boring black and white Arial font bullet point list, which is okay in some circumstances. But if you can do something to sort of make it look a bit nicer, to make it look a bit more involving, then, and if you can do that easily, then why not? So looking over at the right-hand side is what it looks like after I've used the PowerPoint Convert to Smart Art feature. So you'll see there that my topics, or my points, are in a nice font. They're each got a different colour behind them. They're in 3D, and they've got a little red back icon to the left-hand side of them. So there's all sorts of different, I guess, designs that you can use when you're using Smart Art as well, and it all depends on, I guess, the nature of the list that you're using. But to have a quick look at this example here, you'll see, and again, even this list here is just the basic list in the Smart Art tab. If you click on that More Smart Art button down the bottom there within PowerPoint, then there's a lot more as well. But you'll see there, just in that list there, that you've got some that are just points going sort of horizontal or vertical. Some of them have other little images to the left, and others sort of utilize a cyclical process whereby the points are sort of pointed around in a circle or in a dotted arrow line moving from left to right or right to left. So it all depends on the nature of your content, on what sort of a Smart Art graphic you might choose to convert your list to. But it's well worth, I think, if you're in the habit of creating PowerPoint presentations, to look at that feature in PowerPoint, because it's, I guess it's easy to use, it's fun to use as well, and as I said, it can really take a really boring looking list and make it look like something that's been professionally made. And I guess the best way I can show you this feature is to actually demonstrate it. So what I'd like to do is show you a quick video, and I think this video runs for about 50 seconds. And this video that I'm going to show you basically is just a quick recording that I've made of me converting a standard list in PowerPoint to the Smart Art graphic list that you see there on that page there. So the example I've used is just apple, oranges, banana, pears, and pineapples. So nothing too exciting. And I've just realised on the fly here that if I had have swapped around pineapple and pears, that I would have almost had a colour match. But never mind, that could be for next time.
Yeah. I'm just going to launch the video for you all, and if it does take a while to buffer on your end, never mind. As I said earlier, we are actually going to be sending out an email containing this PowerPoint presentation, just in regards to your question, Paola. and it will also contain these videos on there for you guys to take a look at later. So I'm just going to launch it, and hopefully, depending on your internet connection, it will play great.
So I'll just see if I can give a commentary of this. I'm just cautious that some people's might still be buffering, so apologies if I'm not following there, but you'll see me just typing out the list there in PowerPoints and just converting that to a bullet point list there. Now I click on Convert to SmartArt and choose the list type that I want. And I'm just dragging that down to expand that to make it a little bigger. From there I'm just highlighting the bullet points there, and I'm going to change the font. Something different.
You're so fast.
Yeah, but you don't know if I recorded this 100 times before I got that.
I'll never know.
And you see there, I'm just changing the colour and also giving it some 3D effects there. And that's it. So that basically took about 50 seconds, and that was me converting that list to SmartArt. And just a quick comment I see from Chris. Thank you, Chris. That's a good point. SmartArt is not available in versions of PowerPoint prior to 2007, I believe. So from memory, I think it's 2007 and 2010, which is the latest version. Versions previous to that do not have the SmartArt feature. So yeah, people who were still sitting on earlier versions, apologies for that teaser there. But you might want to sort of have a word to whoever you need to there in the office and see if you can get that upgraded for the benefit of your presentations. Okay, so moving along. And just a quick note there, if you sort of watched that video and thought, what the heck was going on there, I didn't follow a single bit of that, don't worry too much. The purpose of that video was more to show you that it is pretty easy and pretty quick to use, and just to brag that I can do it in under a minute. But as Sarah said, we'll be following up this webinar with a PDF sheet that gives you a few links to some tutorials and things that go in a bit more detail into some of the things that we touched on today. So if you are interested in having a look at that SmartArt feature, then you can get some links to some good tutorials there that you can follow at your own pace there. Having a look at another feature there in PowerPoint that is handy to use, and again really easy to use, is the Shapes feature. Shapes can be used for quite a few different things, even just on a basic level when you're putting your template together, just using the shapes to make the rectangles for your headers and footers. You can also use shapes to make arrows, or to make quotation bubbles and things, as you see there. There's just a few examples on the page there. But again, obviously things like arrows and circles and things, rather than having to copy them and paste from somewhere else or draw them yourself, it's a lot easier just to grab them straight from PowerPoint. So, and if you haven't if you're not familiar with using the Shapes feature, then it's something that you can sort of overlook and find yourself doing things that take more time to achieve the same results. So yeah, another good feature there, and one that you should check out. Another good feature that I'd like to touch on in PowerPoint is the chart feature. So charts are what you can use to take data in lots of different formats and turn them into, I guess, graphs, charts and things like that, so that you can display that data, I guess, in a more visually appealing way, as the slide says there. So using the chart feature is pretty easy. All you need to do is click on the chart button in PowerPoint, and you can work with charts using data that you've already got. Say, for example, if you've got an Excel spreadsheet and you wanted to incorporate the information in that spreadsheet and display it in a graphical form, then you can just sort of, once you click on the chart button, it gives you the option to locate that Excel spreadsheet file, or you can just create your data on the fly. So if you've just got a few fields of data that you need to add to create your pie chart, then you can just do it in PowerPoint itself. And it's, I guess, just as an example, I think I used a pie chart in one of the earlier pages just to give you a graphical, or I should say a visual breakdown of the minutes involved in a typical 1-hour webinar. So rather than just sort of give you a list, sometimes it's nicer and easier to follow if it's in a graph form. So it's something I'd recommend if you have data that you need to display, to think about having a look at the chart feature in PowerPoint, because there's lots of nice charts that you can use. And going back to the version of PowerPoint, I believe charts are available prior to 2007 in PowerPoints, I don't think you've got as many choices, especially in terms of 3D graphs and things like that. So I think they're more two-dimensional in nature. But I think they're certainly available to some of those earlier versions. Now, one thing we talked about when we talked about the templates was, I guess, getting a uniform style and encouraging you, if you were working in a company that had multiple presenters presenting webinars, to think about sort of doing that at a company level. Just to sort of expand on that, what I would recommend, and sort of as a good little tip, is that your company's website is a great way, or I guess a great source of inspiration for your webinar templates. You can very quickly get things like, obviously, your corporate logo, your corporate colors, corporate fonts, and things like that, and then any other sort of graphical elements that your company might use in its branding that you can sort of nick, as it were, for your templates. So yeah, I think as a first port of call, I always recommend to sort of have a quick look at your website. It's probably something that you're pretty familiar with already, but if not, it just sort of reinforces, I guess, things like colors and style, you know, what sort of fonts and what sort of, how big your header should be and things like that, especially if you're going from scratch. Now, on that note, if it's something that you were thinking about on a company level, then I guess it's easier at that point to consider things like getting a graphic designer or somebody else in to create your template. Obviously, if it's going to be something that you're using long term for lots of different webinars. But again, what we're trying to take you through today are things that you can do yourself, things that don't cost money, that can really improve the quality of your webinar slides. But yeah, on that note, I'd say sort of first port of call is your company's website. So, and again, in terms of confirming the colors that your company uses in your website, I'll very quickly show you a little trick that I use when confirming what's called the hex color codes of the exact colors used on your company's website, just to make it quick and easy and you're not guessing with the color palette and PowerPoint.
I guess a really good tip there to make as well, Todd, is that your company's logo isn't necessarily a brand, doesn't necessarily have to be on the slide to represent the brand, does it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, you might be working for an organisation or for a project, and it's not so much company related. So I say company logo, but that could be any sort of logo related to your webinar. But yeah, so it's not necessarily to include your company logo on every slide at all. You might find that your company appreciates if you would do that. So again, that's something that you can discuss individually or sort of internally as a group as well. So we'll move on to, I guess, what I like to think of as the fun part of today's webinar, the cool resources. And again, cool means free. So the first resource that we're going to look at is a website called picmonkey.com. And again, all of the links to these resources will be available to you when we send through the follow-up PDF sheet for this webinar. But just having a look at PicMonkey, this site's fairly new. It's been around for the last year or two. It's completely free, at least it is at this stage. So I think they're looking to keep it as an advertising model. So you've got a little banner ad at the bottom of the site, but that doesn't affect the pictures that you make with it. But PicMonkey can be used for lots of different things, and I think as a point of reference, if any of you are familiar with things like Instagram on your phones, then I guess that's a good starting point. But PicMonkey's probably got a bit more in the way of functionality than things like Instagram. You can use it to take sort of just basic pictures that you have and sort of just spruce them up a bit. And the example that I've shown there is just a pretty basic picture of two of my colleagues that I've just converted to look like it's a Polaroid shot with their names jotted down the bottom, freehand. And that's just one example. If you sort of jump onto the site and have a look with PicMonkey, you'll find there's all sorts of frames and sort of edits that you can do to your pictures to sort of, I guess, make them stand out in your webinar. And what I'm going to do is just show you quickly, again, in a video that I've recorded earlier. Here's one that I made earlier, if you will. And Sarah's just bringing this video up now. We're just going to watch how quick it was for me to convert that picture there. So again, apologies if you're not quite buffered and a bit behind my commentary, but you just see me going to the website and uploading the picture there. It just takes a moment to upload to the PicMonkey site. Once it's uploaded, I can go down to the frames option there on the left-hand side and choose Polaroid frame. Now I'm used to this, so I'm just very quickly getting my effect fade up to 100%.
How long did this one take you?
This took about 1 minute and 10 seconds.
So it was over the
I
minute?
I tried to get it under a minute, but I just didn't get it. There you see me adding the name, Pete Wilson, choosing my font. I'll add that. Now I've just got to change the colour of my font, get it to the size that I like, and move it in place. Once I've got it in place, I just need to twist it round so that it matches that the angle of that picture nicely. And from there I can save that to my local hard drive. And once I save that to my hard drive, that's available to me to use in any project I like. So I can include that in the PowerPoint presentation that I'm making. And again, there's lots of different things that you can do with PicMonkey. That's just one example. And we'd certainly recommend, if you're sort of curious after this webinar, to jump on and have a look at some of the other features that are available to you there. Okay, moving along. Okay, so oops, I jumped the gun there. As you see there, it's very easy to use, about a minute and 10 seconds. And so if anyone can beat me at that score, let me know, and you'll be the new champ. Get a leaderboard going. Okay, now free font websites. I would mention that's a good place if you're looking for something out of the ordinary in the way of fonts. Sometimes, especially when you're making your headers or making your first slide, you might be looking for something that just sort of really stands out. You might be looking for a handwritten font, or something that sort of looks like it's written in crayon or something like that, or something nice and snazzy and sort of modern looking, something to complement your content, I guess. And I'd recommend there's 1,000,001 free font sites available out there on the internet. You'll see that I've just included a handful of names there at the bottom of the screen. But all you really need to do is jump onto Google and type in free fonts, and you could easily lose a day looking through them all. And they're pretty easy to install. If you find a font that you like on any of these sites, all you usually have to do is either right-click or click on the Save button or Download button. Once you save it or download it in Windows 7, all you need to do is click on Install once you open up the file that you've downloaded. Now, of course, if you're using earlier versions of Windows or you're on a Mac, it might be a little different, but we'll include, again, some quick links to some tutorials on how to install fonts, if that's something you're looking to do. But yeah, free font sites, we definitely recommend having a look if you're looking for something out of the ordinary and something to set your presentation apart from the others, so to speak. Okay, another really cool site is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, pixlr.com. That's www.pixlr.com. Basically what Pixlr is a free, I guess, alternative to Adobe Photoshop. And by free, I mean really free. You just log onto the site. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to become a member or enter your email address or anything like that. You just go to pixlr.com, and you can either upload an image that you've got on your hard drive, or you can pick an image from a website and start editing that just like you would on Photoshop. And it's packed full of functions. It's probably, I guess, I'm sure there are some features there, some things that Adobe Photoshop has that Pixlr doesn't, but with it comes a price tag, as you know. So if Photoshop isn't something that you've got lying around the office and you don't think that it's going to be likely that your boss is going to be happy to fork out for a license for a couple of webinar presentation slides, then Pixlr is a great starting point. And as I said, you really can, I guess, PicMonkey that we looked at earlier is good for sort of some quick edits and some really quick ways to, I guess, spruce up your pictures. But if you really want to and I guess get more of a Photoshop type functionality with your pictures, then Pixlr is a great starting point. So I'd recommend you check that out as well. And there's a little link. If anyone's bored and sick of seeing my face in the corner, you can click on that link that Sarah's put in there and have a quick look at Pixlr while I'm talking, but be sure to come back. Okay, so that pretty much takes us to the end of the main content of today's presentation. So I'll open it up now for questions. I know we've got a few that have come in, which I'll start with, but I'd recommend if you've got anything that interested you and you sort of wanted to know a bit more, or anything that I didn't explain exactly clearly, jump in and ask a question or just put in a comment, and I'll endeavour to get to you before the end of the session.
Peter asked a question earlier, Todd. So have you given any consideration for video timeframes overall or in relation to the length of the presentation?
Okay, and I'm going to go out on a limb and assume, Peter, what you mean by that is, I guess, the quality or resolution of your video files that you're sharing in your webinar. If that's not the case, jump in, Peter, and let me know. But yeah, basically what I would recommend as a best practice when sharing video in your webinar is to try and provide that video, I guess, in the smallest resolution possible. And when I say possible, I mean obviously it's a trade-off with quality. So you don't want your picture looking like Max Headroom, if anybody remembers the old Pepsi commercials from the 1980s. Basically really pixelated. So you don't want your videos coming through too pixelated, but you obviously don't want to upload high-definition videos to a webinar for a couple of reasons. Obviously, any video that you're sharing is going to share the bandwidth that your audio and your presentation slides are, and you could find that your videos are impacting on the video while they're loading for your participants, and also in terms of the videos buffering. If you've got a really big video file, it's going to be subjective depending on your participants' internet connection and when they're receiving the video. So it becomes more and more important for longer video files, obviously, because there can be a greater difference in what any one participant might be watching at any one time. But I would recommend, and certainly if you're sort of doing webinars with Redback, your event manager can certainly help you and assist to make sure that that video is uploaded in the most efficient format. But yeah, so that's definitely a consideration, and obviously you want to, I guess, get the best value for money out of the video you're uploading. So yeah, that is a consideration. So what I usually find when I'm uploading videos is that I drag it right back to 15 frames per second, which I guess in terms of a video that you might see on TV or that you might download off the internet is probably pretty low, but it still gives you enough movement so that it doesn't seem unnatural, and it can cut down a lot on the file size that you're importing as well. So Peter, let me know if I answered your question there. I hope I was on the right track there. If not, just let me know and I'll jump back and have another crack at that one.
And I also wanted to know if you're able to link your company website into a slide.
You can do that. The slide is not, or the link will not be clickable by your participants. So for example, I could include a URL in this page that we're looking at now, the questions page. It will be visible to my participants, but they would not be able to click on that page. The PowerPoint slides are rendered into the webinar as JPEG images, so that's the same reason that any transitions or animations are basically sort of flattened. And that's because everything is shared in the webinar as a image file. So what we would recommend if you wanted to share your company's websites, of course you can include it in your template, and that way visually your participants can see it the whole time. But you can use the message box, and as you'll see there, Sarah's typed in a couple of domains for you to click on, for example, pixler.com, and I think there was a couple of stock photo sites that she typed in. But you can always use the message box to give URLs for your participants to visit during the course of the webinar. Hopefully that answers that question.
And yeah, also from Christine, is there a rule of thumb regarding the number of slides compared to the length of the presentation?
Good question, and I've heard lots of different people give lots of different answers to that question. Me personally, I'm a bit more flexible, and I sort of think it's really subjective. You might find, I've seen people go through a 60-minute webinar where they're presenting for perhaps 45 to 50 minutes, and they've gone through 130, 140 slides comfortably. And that's because a lot of their slides are images that they're a webinar on a medical topic, and a lot of their images are just reinforcing the, I guess, phenomena or the procedures that they're describing. And for that reason, they're obviously sort of clicking through lots of pictures. They're not sort of sitting on any one slide for an extended period of time. Then again, you get people who I've seen sort of comfortably keep themselves occupied in a 1-hour webinar with 6 slides. So, and you would think that that sort of would not be really enough to keep your audience, I guess, entertained or occupied. But it all depends. And again, I would recommend as a best practice from my experience, somewhere maybe around about, for a 1-hour webinar, maybe 40 to 50 slides. So bearing in mind that for a 1 hour webinar, you're probably not speaking for that entire 60 minutes. So if you sort of keep it maybe to 1 slide per minute. But having said that, I think there's lots of flexibility there, and it would all depend on the content you're presenting, whether or not that presenter's presented the content before. You find that if somebody's presenting the same webinar over and over again, sort of as the weeks go by, that they think of other things that they can include, and they start to get a bit more efficient with their time, and they can add other slides. But probably if you're sort of, if it's the first time that you're putting together a presentation, I would say maybe 40 to 50 slides for 1 hour, and then you can sort of practice with your presenter once the slides are made, and then revisit that if need be once you've sort of had a practice with your slides.
Great. And also from Steve, so over 40-minute webinar on average, how many different topics or ideas would you introduce at most?
Again, this is another one that sort of I've heard a lot of different answers to. I've heard it range from right down to people who suggest that you should try and minimise it right down to one main message that you're delivering in your webinar, and just sort of like keep everything focused around that one main point. And I find from experience that there's not a lot of, I guess, instances where I've found that would be perfect advice. So I think, again, it's really subjective, and it's hard for me to sort of say 100% this is what I'd recommend. Yeah, so I'm finding, I probably wouldn't want to say one way or the other, but I guess what I find more important is that the points you do choose to make, don't try and include too many. I think the content and what it is that you're trying to present will sort of dictate how many messages are involved, and if you find that your content involves so many messages that it might be a bit pressed to include them all in a 1 hour or 1 hour and a half webinar, then think about having multiple webinars or splitting that down into sessions. But I think that you can include, you can easily include half a dozen different main points in your webinar, I think, comfortably, as long as you're, I guess, able to differentiate those points and able to get those points across to your audience without those points sort of merging or sort of being unclear. But yeah, I don't think that there's any hard and fast rule as to how many points that you should include. Yeah. Obviously, you'll get an idea if you find that all of your slides are just jam-packed with bullet points, then you're probably including too many main points, and you might need to think about sort of spreading that across different sessions.
I guess also, just for myself, as someone who hosts but also attends a lot of webinars, I myself find that if I join a 60-minute webinar, my aim is to take away at least 2 or 3 key messages from that webinar that I can then go incorporate and actually apply to something. So hopefully that may help with your answer, and when creating your actual content, maybe just keep that in the back of your mind. What are maybe the 2 or 3 key messages that you want your participants to go away with? That usually tends to help us focus.
Well said. Thank you, Sarah. Okay.
That seems to be all the questions. We do have some questions regarding the conferencing technology and the way that we've presented the slides today. And just as an overall to people out there, this is a Redback technology, the conferencing service we're using, so we're using our own technology, and it's not actually screen sharing in response to Renee's questions. It's actually imported into the library, which is inside the conferencing platform, just for anyone else out there wondering.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, great. Well, I guess last chance for any questions. If there's no more questions, I'm just going to quickly take us through a quick overview of today's session, but if you do find that you're typing away, by all means send your questions through, and if I don't get to respond to them when we wrap things up today, I'll make sure that I catch up with you via email. But very quickly, I'm just going to have a look at a quick checklist of some of the points we've gone through today. Not everything that we've covered, but I guess just the main points that I'd like to sort of send you away with. So the first point, I guess, is plan your presentation before your slides. As we said at the beginning, if you've sort of got a good idea of how much time you have, what it is that you're presenting, then it's a lot easier to sort of put your slides together rather than build your slides and your audio presentation at the same time, which can sort of lead to a lot more back and forth and umming and ahhing. Base your slides on your key points. So again, if you've got your presentation first, then the slides come a lot quicker. And if you base them on your key points, then each of your slides is going to be a lot more pertinent and sort of focus your audience on what it is that you're trying to present to them. Create a branded template for your slides. Again, this is something that you might choose to do company-wide, or that you might just choose to do for all of the webinars that you present, or even just for the one particular webinar that you're presenting. It's still worthwhile to make a template there. Be consistent with fonts, colours and sizes, and that goes back to your template. So obviously, once you've chosen your fonts and colours and things, just stick to them, and that sort of can keep that uniformity throughout your presentation. Carefully consider your first and last slides. As we said, so people can sit there looking at your first slides for anywhere up to an hour. So if you can include some pertinent information that sort of puts them in a good position when the webinar starts, then all the better. And again, one main point per slide. There's probably some exceptions to that. Probably the two main exceptions that you will see to that would be your agenda slide and your conclusion slides. In fact, what we're looking at now, so this is one of the only slides that you'll see in my presentation today that has any form of bullet points. So obviously if you're wrapping things up or just quickly going over the whole agenda, then that's one of those instances where it would be fine to use bullet points. But other than that, if you can keep it down and sort of just keep that one point per slide, and that will reinforce your message. Placeholder slides for polls and Q&A are always a great idea, just so that your participants at any time know exactly where you are in the webinar. Obviously, again, something I didn't mention, if your participants sort of jump in halfway through and you're in the middle of questions or a poll and they don't see that on their screen, then they won't obviously know to participate in that. So just good practice to include those in your slide deck. Images to reinforce points. Again, obviously include all the images you can from what you have at your disposal. And if you find that you can use additional images that you can get from stock sites or from Google that will reinforce the message of any particular slide, then do so. And again, you can be a bit more, I think, fun with your images than you would things like videos and things. So I think pictures are where you can sort of give the presentation a bit more of a looser feel. So that's something to keep in mind. PowerPoint graphics features for fancy lists and data. So, for example, the Smart Art feature and the graphs feature and the shapes feature. They're really quick and easy to use. Again, it's worthwhile checking what version of PowerPoint you're on before you jump in and get excited. But there's certainly, even in the earlier versions, a lot of those features will be available, just not some of the newer features. And lastly, there are use free web tools to spice up your images. So we had a look at a couple, PicMonkey and Pixlr. But yeah, if you find that you're working with images that you already have and they sort of look a bit plain, just stuck there in the middle of your slides, then have a look at PicMonkey or Pixlr and some of the other sites that I'll send through in the PDF once we send you the recording, and I guess prettying up your presentation. So that pretty much takes us to the end of the presentation today. Just to make sure that I haven't got any more questions come in the last couple of minutes. Sarah, have you noticed any more?
No. Yeah, we actually do, just quickly before we close off. And for those of you who do need to leave, we do understand. So feel free to click on the exit button on the top right-hand corner. And like I said earlier, once the satisfaction survey is completed, you will actually receive an email containing exactly what's written on the PowerPoint slides. But just to get back to the last question, we're talking about the length of a webinar. So would you say that 1 hour is the usual length of a webinar? That's from Robin.
Yeah, I would say, Robin, typically that's probably the most common time frame that I see for a webinar. Obviously, depending on the contents, I get webinars that are an hour and a half. That's probably the second most common. And from there, it's pretty subjective. So if your content's going to need 3 hours or 4 hours, then we can certainly webinar. And I assume providers would be able to schedule a webinar of that nature. But yes, I think I guess from my experience in terms of the webinars that I deal with, the companies that I work with, I would say that 60 minutes would be a pretty typical webinar time.
I know myself, I tend to drift off if anything's more than an hour long. Yeah. So I think it's a good idea to be mindful of someone else and their time that they're actually giving up. But yeah, just before I hand it over to Todd for closing comments, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today on behalf of Redback. Hopefully these webinars are of use to you all, and we do enjoy seeing you all attend on a fortnightly basis. So like I said, we will send out the information within 48 hours, but in the meantime, please feel free to email us should you require anything else. And I'd now like to hand it back over to Todd for closing comments.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, and thanks very much, everybody, for joining. Appreciate your time. This is the first time that I actually presented this content, so I might be really interested to grab some of your feedback. There'll be a quick exit survey at the end of the session. So, yeah, I'd really like to, I guess, the content that I presented today, hopefully that was something that you were able to use in the future, and that you were able to sort of get something from that, or at least sort of spurred some ideas. But yeah, I'd love to get your feedback, good or bad, from this survey, and we'll use that in influencing, I guess, the slides for the next time that this is presented. So thanks again for your time. Have a great day, and see you all soon.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.